We're going to get started. We'll, yeah, if you'll just keep an eye out for Mr. Ward and let him in when he gets here, please. All right, on record. Good morning, everybody. Council, thank you both for being here on time. Appreciate that. If you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones. I think what we'll do is we'll go around with introductions. I'll start first. Well, let me say this. We're here in the matter of Cedirck Greer, certification number 12-0027-P. My name is Frederick William Reed III. I'm the hearing officer today. I'm a 22-and-a-half-year veteran of law enforcement. I retired in 2010. Just briefly, retired as a captain from the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department. During my tenure at the Sheriff's Department, as a deputy, I worked field services, narcotics, property crimes. I was assigned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Violent Fugitive Task Force. Violent Fugitive Task Force. I was also assigned to the United States Drug Enforcement Administration Task Force as a detective. As a sergeant, I worked field services, crimes against children, sex crimes, narcotics. As a lieutenant, I was the South Area Commander. I was also in charge of the Child Abuse Sex Crimes Division and in charge of the Narcotics Division. And as a commander and captain, I was in charge of the Field Services Division for the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department. I retired from the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department in 2007. I was the Chief of Police for Albuquerque Public Schools from 2007 to 2010. I'm a graduate of the FBI National Academy 217th session, and I have a degree in management from the University of New Mexico. I'm currently a licensed realtor. So, that's me. We'll go around the table and please make your introductions.
My name is Joshua Granada. I work at the Attorney General's office in the Civil Division of Litigation, and I'm here on behalf of the prosecution.
Thank you.
I'm Kate Carmichael. I'm a second-year law student at Harvard, and I'm interning with the Attorney General's office. And Josh offered to let me tag along for the day, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Former Albuquerque Police Officer Cedirck Greer. I'm here to hopefully go through the hoops and do what I can to get out of the mess that I am currently in.
I represent Cedirck Greer, who's seated to my right. My name is John D'Amato.
Thank you, Mr. Romano. Any stipulations that you gentlemen have worked out that we need to put on the record?
Yes, last week Josh was kind enough to send me 53 exhibits, numbered 1 through 53, 54 through 76, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sorry, 53 through 90 are electronic, either audios or videos, but 1 through 53 are paper documents. We stipulate to their admission, and then Josh will get me, I think we have these already, but he'll get me 1 CD containing all of the remaining exhibits. We stipulate to their admission.
Mr. Granada?
Mr. Hearing Officer, it's my understanding that that's correct, that Respondents' Counsel will stipulate to the admission of all the evidence that we've provided. And just so that the record's clear, the way that I will present the audio, all the electronic evidence to the hearing officer and to the board is that after the conclusion of the hearing, I'll make one audio recording and if possible, include the photos and the video on that one disc so that there aren't multiple copies of discs, just for the ease of the hearing officer when you're drafting the report.
Great.
I'll provide a copy to Respondents' Counsel prior to submitting it to the hearing officer so that there aren't any surprises and so that we're all on the same page and in agreement.
Great, thank you. That's much appreciated. Are there any other housekeeping items we need to take care of?
There is another matter which I'm not sure how it's going to affect today's hearing, but there are a number of procedural items which are kind of concerning to the prosecution. Cedirck Greer has failed to submit a statement of issues, which is required by board rule. And so at this point, the prosecution is left not really understanding what the issues are for today. The second issue is that Cedirck Greer has failed to submit a witness list or an exhibit list. So it's my understanding that Mr. Greer will not put forward any evidence or any witnesses. And if there aren't any issues and any evidence or any witnesses, it's kind of difficult for me to prepare for the case. Mr. Greer is required to, by board rule, the word shall is there, and so I'm not sure why Mr. Greer has failed to submit those documents. The prosecution would ask that the hearing officer exclude any witnesses and any evidence that the respondent brings forward.
That are not included in your, or are you talking any witnesses, or?
He has no witnesses.
Let me address that if I may.
Thank you.
Respondent is here to defend against an action brought by the AG's office, Law Enforcement Academy Board. We do not intend on calling witnesses. We believe that the prosecutor's witness list contains 12 witnesses, which exhausts the universe of witnesses in this case. So there are no additional witnesses respondent wishes to call. The statement of issues was not filed simply because we're assuming that the premise for the revocation is for use of excessive force. And I think the evidence will, either in an opening or at least one of the witnesses will testify use of excessive force. So I mean, I don't know how, it was not meant to confuse or delay this proceeding in any way, but it doesn't get simpler than this hearing. There's one issue, and the issue is, did respondent Cedirck Greer engage in any use of force that would be deemed excessive, sufficient to either suspend or revoke a certification? That's the issue, unless Mr. Granata has another issue which I'm not aware of.
There are a couple of other issues which would have helped me in terms of clarity. The board can also revoke for lack of good moral character. I think that the evidence presented today will show that there are inconsistencies in statements, and essentially if Mr. Greer is to be disbelieved, then he has lied either during the criminal investigation or during the internal affairs investigation, which would warrant revocation. Additionally, there is a criminal proceeding that is occurring.
Good morning. Apologize for
Criminal proceeding has been continued. However, if Mr. Greer were found guilty of the charges that he has been indicted on in the criminal case, then that would support additional evidence to revoke Mr. Greer's license.
May I respond briefly to that? My understanding is that the regulations and the statutes pertain to either misdemeanor, domestic violence, crime involving moral turpitude, honesty, dishonesty, theft, domestic violence. It does not contain a misdemeanor charge for battery. Mr. Greer was not indicted. The state police filed a criminal complaint that states facts sufficient, if believed, if found to be true beyond a reasonable doubt, of battery, aggravated battery. Now, there may be some confusion on Mr. Granata's part with regard to, and I think this is addressed in the exhibits that we've stipulated to, and we'll hear from the state police officer with personal knowledge as to my proffer. The criminal complaint was filed. There was no subsection added to the criminal complaint. Booking got the criminal complaint and filed it as a felony charge. When the state police officer became aware of that, he immediately contacted the district attorney's office, corrected it, and the criminal complaint now reads as a misdemeanor. So at no time was he indicted for a felony, and the criminal complaint that was filed originally as a misdemeanor was mistakenly listed as a felony. So while I believe that the first issue, i.e. excessive force, and the second issue, lack of good moral conduct or character with respect to any untruthfulness in this case are properly before this hearing officer.
Thank you. Mr. Granado, anything else?
Yes, Board Rule 10.29.1.13C2, grounds for revocation of a police officer, indicates that if the respondent is convicted guilty or enters a plea of nolo contendere to any violation of any federal, state law, or local ordinance, and then the word relating to aggravated assault, theft, DWI, controlled substance, or other crime involving moral turpitude, I would certainly allege that, or argue that, an aggravated battery is a crime of moral turpitude, especially if it's a crime committed while the officer is on duty. Furthermore, with the word relating to aggravated assault, I would argue that battery is related to aggravated assault. Battery and assault are commonly charged together, and they're often related to one another. And so that's another issue that the board might find justification to revoke Mr. Greer's certification, and this issue was not brought to my attention.
And again, the regulation does define, the Law Enforcement Academy Board of Regulations define moral turpitude, and I've asked the hearing officer to not expand that under Mr. Granada's theory.
Thank you. Mr. Ward, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good morning. Rick Ward, I'm Assistant Attorney General in the Open Government Division of Counsel for the Law Enforcement Academy Board, and I'm here in that capacity to assist the hearing officer.
Thank you.
Apologize for being held up.
No problem. With Mr. Ward's arrival, I'm going to take a quick recess to consult with him, and I'm going to go off the record for just a minute, please. It's locked.
Oh, no, it's okay.
So, how many exhibits are there? 1, 2.
There's 1 through 53 paper, which I think is there. And then it looks like there's going to be 54 through, 54 through 86. Oh, I'm sorry, 54 through 90.
90?
54 through 90.
There's going to be. He hasn't got this yet, or? You know what, I'll ask him when he comes.
I don't know if he has, I think he has them, but he wants to reduce them to 1 CD. So there's a mixture
I'll
of
talk to him.
photographs, audio interviews, and lapel cameras.
All I want to really figure out is, he never said that they were admitted yet either, so I have to.
No, right,
we have to go
right.
back to him. And you don't have any exhibits?
I have no exhibits.
Okay, good. Thanks. You don't record when we go off the record, do you? You don't record when he goes off, do you?
It won't be used.
Well, you really
The
shouldn't
answer
be
is
recording
yes.
when you really shouldn't be recording when we're sitting in here talking. I don't really think that's proper.
Well, this is public. This is public. No expectation of privacy in public, ma'am.
Okay. So even when we're off the record, we're on the record.
Text each other. Yeah, exactly.
We need to put a note in here, put a note on everybody's, around everybody's place that the camera and the recordings are always on. So don't say anything that you don't want everybody in the whole world to know about. If everybody in the world's gonna watch the video, right?
You're freelance?
I hope so.
Are you freelance?
Yeah.
You're not assigned as a poll reporter to this, are you?
I'm sorry?
You're not assigned as a poll reporter.
At
In
what?
other words, other outlets, other media outlets have not assigned you
No,
as a poll reporter?
No.
Okay.
no.
Josh, we're always on the record.
But we're always on camera,
Camera's rolling.
always. So
Leave it to the editors.
If,
put yourself a note
yeah,
there.
me. If there's something that you definitely don't want to have on camera, please let me know. I'll
Sure.
be glad to shut it down.
All right, good.
Okay.
By then it's too late.
Not trying to be difficult.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Just a second, please.
Okay.
This is just for your information and works too. I'm not gonna.
All right, on the record. All right, gentlemen, thank you. I apologize for the delay. We're going to proceed.
Will you also record for just a
Yes.
second? Can I get the exhibit straightened out, because you haven't admitted the exhibit yet.
Correct.
And I don't know, so 1 through 53 are these papers here, and 54 through 90 are what now?
Electronic audio, video, photos.
And are those gonna be on a CD? Are they on a CD now, or no?
They're on multiple CDs, and so at the conclusion of the hearing, I'll put together one CD.
Oh, okay. One CD for you, me? Oh,
Yeah, one copy of all of the stuff, but 4 copies of that one CD.
Okay, all right, thanks. So the exhibits that need to be admitted are exhibits 1 through 90?
That's correct.
Josh, that may spill over to a second to see this one, because there's a lot of stuff.
90 are the exhibits. Thank you, sorry.
And just to advise, during the break, we did not discuss this case except for the exhibits and found out that the camera will never sleep.
Thank you. Okay, any objections to the exhibits?
No.
So admitted. All right, Mr. Granata, would you like opening?
Well, Mr. Hearing Officer, for the record, I made a motion to exclude respondents' witnesses, should he call witnesses, and to exclude any evidence that respondent tends to, once offered to the board, and so I'd like a ruling on that motion.
What's my understanding, Mr. Dumont, go ahead.
I'll represent to Mr. Granata and to the board and the hearing officer that there will be no witnesses on behalf of the respondent, that the universe of witnesses is contained in the prosecutor's witness list. There are no exhibits. That which is contained in Exhibit Book 1 through 53 are the exhibits that exist in this universe, so we're satisfied with that.
Very good. I'm going to overrule your objection.
I would just respectfully like to put on the record that these rules are drafted so that both parties are provided fairness for the hearing, and it's my belief that if respondent wholly neglects to follow through with what's required by the board, it puts the prosecution at a disadvantage in preparing for the case. That being said, I will go forward. I think there is one issue still, though. If respondent does call, he's indicated that he's not going to call any witnesses, so I'm assuming he's not going to call the respondent either.
The respondent's party, he's going to testify.
We'll allow the respondent to testify. We're not going to allow any other witnesses on the part of the respondent. Other than those called by the prosecution.
Okay. I'll give a brief opening. The evidence in this case will show that on March 20th, 2015, Officer Greer was working with the Albuquerque Police Department He was on duty that day, and he was working closely with Officer Roush, who was also employed at that time with the Albuquerque Police Department. On that day, Officer Roush and Officer Greer responded to a down and out call. I believe it was a priority 1 down and out call. And there was a cadet that accompanied Officer Roush on this call. During the call, the down and out was eventually arrested. It's my understanding that the testimony and evidence will show that at some point during the confrontation between Officer Greer and the suspect, Adrian Marthel, that Officer Greer struck Adrian Marthel numerous times. He struck him in the head twice, punched him in the ribs a couple times. And he had no lawful reason to do so. About the time that Mr. Marthel was placed under arrest, the camera started to roll. There was no audio or video of this interaction, and the evidence will show that there are consistent statements from the cadet regarding what happened that night. There's an additional witness who saw some of the events occur, and the credibility of the witness, the cadet, is undeniable. And the board's going to be put in a position to judge whether Officer Greer is telling the truth or the cadet is telling the truth. And that is what you'll hear today.
Thank you, Mr. Granada. Mr. Diamano?
Thank you. When it's all said and done, you're going to have 2 witnesses to rely on as far as personal knowledge, the people that were there. The cadet, who, contrary to what this prosecutor has indicated, has given somewhat variables on what he observed. The inconsistencies amount to whether it is sufficient evidence to form the basis of a suspension or a revocation. You're going to hear the cadet say it happened, and what it is will be defined in better terms during the course of the hearing. And you will hear from Officer Greer, who said it did not happen. Strikingly, Adrian Marthel, the alleged victim in this case, gave a statement to police that he was not a down and out. He was the target of a trespass call from the motel owner. He wanted the motel owner or motel manager on the day, March 20th, wanted this guy removed. Officers rolled up to the scene. They made contact with him. He was compliant. Marthel was compliant. Came down to the lower level, sat on a parking curb stop. Both officers escorted him down. During a pat-down search, it was discovered that there were 2 marijuana cigarettes in his pocket. One officer, Officer Roush, after obtaining ID, went to his unit. Both units were there. They were driving separately. Ran a warrants and warrants. I think Roush's testimony is in here. He's deployed. Officer Roush is deployed. He will not testify today. And while he was running warrants and warrants, he observed something was happening. He ran over and observed Officer Greer holding one arm, and then they placed him under arrest. And it's important to note certain key facts that you'll hear. One is Roush did not see any violence. Marthel, when giving a statement to the state police, said that the officers were friendly, polite. He was escorted to a police car after being approached by officers, transported to MDC, and does not remember being struck. Had no memory. Now, the alcohol content of Mr. Marthel was 0.19. Mr. Marthel indicated that he had taken some quantity of heroin within the past 24 hours, that ironically, no injuries. And the cadet will tell you, if he testifies today, it's in his report, that Mr. Greer slammed him on the ground and his face hit, now depending on which version you choose, the cadet said his face hit the ground or his face bounced off the concrete twice. That's how hard of an impact it was. The internal affairs sergeant who investigated this saw that disparity in statements and contacted MDC, Metro Detention Center, to find out what medical services were provided. None were provided. One of the other keynote pieces of evidence that you'll see is once Officer Roush had Mr. Martell in custody, Martell was transported to the Prisoner Transport Center downtown Albuquerque. There's a video of that. And you see Martell sitting on a bench, not in pain, not injured, not bleeding, not scraping, nothing to indicate injuries that would be consistent with what the cadet said Officer Greer did. I believe you'll hear testimony that the Prisoner Transport Center, before they take custody of a prisoner, is required to assess medically the needs of the prisoner. That was done in this case. No medical attention was required. The second level of medical attention that was assessed was at the Metro Detention Center. And credit to the Internal Affairs Sergeant who contacted MDC, for short, for the medical attention. No medical attention needed. Nothing was needed. What in the booking photo appeared to be an injury to the facial area, the scarring area, or the scar that appeared to be on the facial area of Mr. Martell appeared in previous booking photos prior to March 20th of 2015. So there are no reported injuries, none. If Mr. Martell testifies today, now his testimony may have changed, but he will testify too on cross-examination that as recently as the month of November of 2015, he provided a pretrial interview for the criminal case. And at the pretrial interview, as of November 2015, if Mr. Martell testifies, the evidence will show this. Go ahead, Mr. Bernard, I'm sorry.
There are a number of, I apologize for objecting during your opening statement. However, this highlights the difficulty that I'm placed under where a witness list hasn't been provided and no exhibit list has been provided. He has mentioned 3 pieces of evidence that are not listed on mine in his opening statement, and this puts me at a terrible disadvantage. The PTC videos are not on my exhibit list. The copies that I have do not work, and so he is relying upon videos that I do not have working copies of. Secondly, he's indicated that there are prior booking photos of Mr. Martell. I do not have copies of those. Those are not on my exhibit list. Third, he has indicated a pretrial interview of the criminal proceedings. I do not have copies of those pretrial interviews. I'm put at a terrible disadvantage. He has indicated so even in his opening statement.
May I address this? Yes. Thank you. Exhibit 45, which is contained in the prosecutor's exhibits, supports the evidence that I alluded to in the opening argument. And that is Exhibit 45 is Sergeant Cimbala's March 24th, 2015, 1:48 p.m. telephone call at Metro Detention Center. My opening remarks were derived from Exhibit 45. You said that what other objection was there?
Pretrial interview with Mr. Martell.
Well, that's subject to cross-examination. I don't have a copy of the pretrial interview. It's a prior statement. I can cross-examine on that. And if Mr. Martell remembers the interview I had with him, that's fine. If he doesn't remember it, that's fine. I mean, it's not reduced to an exhibit. It's a prior statement of a witness. Now, if the state's at a disadvantage and feels that it needs a day to come up to speed, I'm not sure how he is disadvantaged if there was a prior statement of the witness. The third objection was what? I'm sorry.
The booking photos.
The pretrial
The booking photos of Adrian
That would-
Capel from prior arrests.
That's 45, Exhibit 45. Line 48, page 3, quote, "Yeah, and if you look at his previous bookings, it almost looks like he has the same ones." So I mean, I don't understand that. Now, with the pre-trial, with the prison transport center video, that evidence will come through with Sergeant Cimbala, who is out in the lobby waiting to be called.
Mr. Hearing Officer, the prosecution's exhibit lists, number 94, any document relevant to impeachment or rebuttal. He does not have such an indication. It's my understanding with...
I don't have a document.
That's precisely the problem. My understanding of the motion and basically respondent's stipulation is that they're not going to introduce any evidence that is not on this witness list. He has indicated 3 already in opening statement that he's going to rely upon for his case.
With all due respect, everything I said in my opening remarks are contained in this exhibit, that binder, everything. And I'll even go one step further. If at the end of this hearing, there is no satisfactory evidence to support my opening, I'll withdraw those remarks from my opening.
Mr. Granata, I'm going to overrule an objection. I'm going to allow it, noting that basically it's an opening statement. I'll consider evidence as it's presented. If it's contrary or if it's not on your list, then it won't be given any weight.
Mr. Hearing Officer, I would respectfully request a continuance. I don't know how I can honestly go forward with this trial knowing that he's going to rely on evidence that I do not have. He's already indicated that he's going to rely upon this evidence. If this were a criminal trial, it would be a mistrial at this point in time.
This is not a criminal
I
trial.
understand
The
that.
criminal rules don't apply to evidence, so
With all due respect, Mr. Hearing Officer, I think the rules of the board apply to both parties. I understand that you're stuck in a terrible spot, but if one party is blatantly disregarding all the rules, I can't expect how the prosecution's
And I
go
take
forward
exception to
with
that.
this case.
Let's go off the record, if we may, Mr. Hearing Officer.
okay, off the record.
All right, knowing that we're still being recorded.
I would prefer we stay on the record. I don't think there's anything that needs to be said that shouldn't be on the record.
Okay, fair enough.
On the record.
We're going forward? I'll call my witness.
Mr. Granata, I've noted your objections. We're going to proceed. I'm confident in your abilities to move forward with
Thank
this
you, Mr.
case.
Hearing Officer. I'd like some clarity though regarding what I indicated before regarding impeachment or rebuttal evidence. If it's not listed on the exhibit list, is that still going to be allowed by the respondent?
If it's not on the exhibit list, it's not going to be allowed.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. Granata.
The prosecution will call Officer Henry.
Oh, just a moment. Would the gentleman that entered the room, for the record, please introduce yourself?
Sure, Mr. Hearing Officer, Jose Puentes. I'm also employed by the Attorney General's office. I'm just here observing.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Granata.
Just spell your first name, please.
CADE,
And your last name was
Carmichael.
spelled the regular way.
Yeah, C.
All right, thank you.
She'll swear to it.
You can sit down. Can I get your first name, please?
Andrew?
And your last, and your usual initial?
B.
And your last name?
Henry?
Henry?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I swear.
Mr. Henry, can you tell the hearing officer and the board your name, please?
Andrew Henry,
And with whom are you employed?
Albuquerque Police Department.
How long have you been employed with the Albuquerque Police Department?
I started October 18th, 2014.
And where did you go to school? College? Did you go to college?
I have an associate's degree through the Community College of the Air Force.
Okay. And when did you go to the academy?
I began the academy October 18th, 2014.
Okay. And you graduated from the academy?
Yes.
And you're certified by the board?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to direct your attention to a date, March 20th of 2015. Do you remember that date?
Yes, sir.
And why do you remember that date?
Due to the incident that occurred with Officer Greer.
Okay, what kind of law enforcement capacity were you employed at that point in time?
I was still in the APD training academy. I was on a ride along.
Okay, and you were a cadet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how far along had you been in your training at that point in time?
I believe I was at 23 weeks.
And how many weeks total is the program?
28.
Okay, and so you were just short, a few more weeks and you're about to graduate?
Yes, sir.
And you ultimately did graduate from the academy?
Yes, sir.
And are you ranked when you graduate from the academy?
Yes, sir. The common term is P2C.
Okay. And on this date, March 20th, 2015, can you tell me, let's kind of start at the beginning of that day. What were you doing?
So I was assigned to a ride-along in the Southeast Area Command. I was instructed to arrive at the police substation at 1500 to start the shift. The shift went from 1500 to 2300, I believe. So I arrived early, sat down in the briefing room, and waited for the briefing to begin.
Okay, and ultimately you got assigned to ride along with Officer Roush, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And had you had any interaction with Officer Roush prior to this day?
No, sir.
Okay, and so tell me about the ride along.
So, I mean, you have to forgive me, it was a long time ago, but I remember meeting Officer Roush and Officer Greer in the briefing room at the Southeast substation. Just kind of told me, who they were. I was riding along with them. From there, we went to Officer Roush's police unit. I don't recall. There's only a few calls from that day that I remember.
Okay, and what did your uniform consist of?
So I was in the Albuquerque Police Academy uniform, which consisted of the dark blue pants and the light blue Police Academy shirt.
And did you have a firearm?
I did not.
Did you have any type of police weapons?
As I recall, I had a baton and OC spray, commonly referred to as pepper spray.
And had you been trained how to use either of those?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have any video or audio recording equipment on your person?
I did not.
Okay. And so what's the first incident or call that you remember going to with Officer Roush?
The first call that I remember was a down and out. So it's an individual that appears unconscious. It's usually called by, and at the time I did not have this knowledge, but now I have this knowledge, that it's basically an individual that is seen, appears unconscious, so it comes out as a priority one.
And what is a priority one?
It means it's a high priority call. The biggest concern is the welfare of the individual, because it's unknown if he's conscious or breathing, because he appears unconscious.
So for a priority one, did Officer Roush engage his emergency equipment to get to the location?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't believe he did.
And so you responded to this first down and out with Officer Roush
And Officer Greer.
and Officer Greer. Were they in the same unit or were they in separate units?
They were in separate units.
Okay, and so what happened at this first down and out call?
My memory of this event is very limited. But I do remember the individual he appeared unconscious. Officer Greer, myself, and Officer Roush walked up to the individual. They tried talking to him. He was unresponsive. I believe Officer Roush was able to obtain his driver's license from one of his pockets to identify him. At which point, Officer Greer stated, hey, you know how to make these guys respond. And it was something along those lines, not the exact verbiage. And I said, no, not really. And he grabbed the individual's arm and applied a kind of a form of a wrist lock behind his back. When he did this, the individual, kind of rose up, his eyes opened up, and I don't recall exactly what he said, but the individual did, kind of come to, and then Officer Roush came back. I'm guessing he didn't have any warrants or anything
Objection.
like that.
Move it, guessing, speculation.
Sustained.
So just testify as to what you have knowledge of, not
Okay.
thinking about what another person might have been thinking.
Okay, so Officer Roush came back. Officer Greer instructed the individual, if you can walk away with your arms straight out like an airplane, making airplane noises, you were free to go.
And did the down and out comply with Officer Greer's commands?
Yes, sir, he did.
And was he arrested?
No, sir.
And had you met Officer Greer prior to this date of March 20th, 2015?
No, sir.
Okay. And was the first time you met him then during the briefing?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall any of the conversations you had with him?
No, I mean, the majority of the day was just kind of standard guy talk, just kind of BS, and asked me about kind of what my background was, what I did prior to law enforcement.
And at this point in time, had you been trained about how to use force with suspects?
Yes.
Okay, and according to your training, did it appear that Officer Greer was following protocol?
No.
And why not?
A wrist lock is a defensive maneuver to gain pain compliance from someone.
Okay.
It is not a procedure to make someone more alert.
Okay. And just kind of a general question. During your ride-alongs, at any time, were you required to make any statements or to prepare any type of reports?
I was instructed by the academy staff that I could do one of two things. I could either take notes throughout the entire ride-along and give a summary as far as, because you have to turn in homework for the ride-along.
Okay. But in terms of like a criminal investigation, you wouldn't prepare a report?
No, sir.
Okay. And what's the next call that you recall going to?
I recall going to, I believe it was the Fair and Square grocery store. And this was a disturbance call. An individual was, for lack of a better term, just creating a disturbance in the store, and management called police wanting him removed from the property.
Okay, and you arrived at that scene with Officer Roush?
And Officer Greer.
Okay. And so what happened at the Fair and Square grocery store?
We walked in, we made contact with the subject. Officer Roush was talking to him. The subject seemed like he might possibly have, and I don't know how much I can delve into it, but he didn't seem of sane mind.
Okay.
So it was hard to understand what he was trying to tell us and what we were trying to tell him, and he seemed just kind of out of it.
Was he considered a down and out?
No.
Okay.
He was very alert, very awake, but the things he was saying didn't make any sense.
Okay. And so what do you recall about this incident?
As we were walking the subject out of the store, Officer Roush was able to get him to comply just by verbal commands. As we were walking the individual out of the store, he requested medical attention. So he sat he sat down inside the grocery store while we waited for medical attention to arrive.
Okay, and what was Officer Greer doing at this point in time?
We were all just standing in front of the subject. I believe I was standing next to Officer Greer and Officer Roush, and we were just keeping an eye on the subject until paramedics arrived.
And did the subject make any statements that you recall?
That subject, the subject that we were talking to was a white male. He did not.
Were there any other individuals there who made statements that you recall?
Yes, there was a black male that appeared that he had just finished purchasing groceries, and he began to walk out, and he had kind of a loud, boisterous tone, and he was talking to somebody else, and then he saw us, and he said, "Hey, Officer Roush, do you remember me?" And they started having a little bit of a conversation, and he looked at me, and he goes, "Holy crap, they gave you guys a cadet?" And I guess we just kind of laughed it off or whatever. And he pointed at Roush, and he said, "This guy's cool." And then he pointed at Officer Greer. He said, "Well, watch out, this guy's crazy."
Okay. And so what happened next then?
After that, paramedics arrived. They transported the subject. I believe he requested to be transported to the hospital, and then we cleared the call.
Okay. So what was the next call that you recall going to?
The next call I recall was the call at the Best Choice Inn on Central.
Was there another call prior to the Best Choice Inn regarding a down and out?
No.
On like 200 Virginia North, Wisconsin?
I don't recall.
Oh, I think, yeah, that's something else. I think we already spoke about that one. Okay, so the next one was the responding to a call for Best Choice Inn. What do you recall about that incident? You were with Officer Roush in his unit, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and was he dispatched to that call?
And like I said in my initial statement, I don't recall if he was dispatched to it or if he asked for the call, but it did come through the computer system.
Okay. And so what do you recall about the reason for going to the Best Choice Inn?
So he said, "Hey, we're going to take this call. It'll probably be a good one." So I had no idea what that meant.
Okay. And so tell me what happened when you arrived at the scene.
So we arrived at the Best Choice Inn. Officer Roush parked his patrol unit. Officer Greer parked his patrol unit next to it. We proceeded upstairs to the second floor and made contact with the subject of the call, who was later identified as Adrian Marthel.
Can you describe what was Adrian Marthel doing at that point in time? Was he conscious?
He was conscious. Yeah, he was conscious and breathing.
Okay, so was this a down and out call as well?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall if it was a disturbance or a down and out.
Okay, so what did Mr. Marthel look like to you when you saw him?
He's an African-American male, approximately 5'10", maybe 5'11". He was wearing a poofy jacket. I don't recall what kind of pants he was wearing.
Okay. And did you speak with the suspect?
I did not.
Okay. How did you make any other observations about the suspect?
While we were upstairs, it appeared that he was under the influence of some type of either alcohol or narcotic.
Okay. Did you get close enough to smell him, to smell his breath?
I did not.
Okay. He was standing up though? Or was he sitting?
Yes, he was standing up.
Okay, and so when you made, or I guess you as in the group made contact with the suspect, was Officer Roush and Officer Greer with you?
Yes.
Okay. And how did the interaction with Adrian begin?
So Officer Roush contacted him. I think he was asking me, just what are you doing there? I don't remember a large majority of the conversation that happened upstairs because I was nervous in the sense that we were in a very occupied area. There was a lot of people and doors were opening and closing. So I kind of positioned myself to be able to keep a lookout for the rest of the hotel rooms, just in case somebody came out, just to kind of keep them safe.
Okay. And did somebody pat down the suspect?
Yes, Officer Roush did.
Okay, and do you recall Officer Roush asking for consent to pat down the suspect?
I don't remember.
Was the suspect detained at this point in time when he was pat down?
I don't know. The word detained, is kind of a gray area, but he seemed compliant, so I don't know if he was actually detained at that point. They did ask him to go downstairs, which he complied.
Okay. Was Mr. Martel, was he being combative with the officers?
No.
Was he being loud, argumentative?
No, he was actually very quiet, and his responses were very kind of sluggish, what, things like that.
Okay. And you said ultimately he complied by going downstairs with the officers?
Yes, sir.
At some point in time, it's my understanding that marijuana was found on his person. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, sir, and I believe that happened during the pat down.
And did that pat down occur on the second floor, or?
Yes, on the second floor.
And who was the officer who discovered the marijuana on his person?
Officer Roush.
Okay. And were any weapons discovered on Mr. Martel?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, and so Mr. Martel was brought down to the first floor. And what happened then?
So all three of us walked downstairs. Officer Greer instructed Mr. Martel to sit on the parking curb.
Did he comply?
He did.
Okay.
So based on the training that I had at that point, I took up a position to maintain an L formation with Officer Greer. So I stood basically directly in front of Mr. Martel.
Okay.
Officer Greer was slightly back and to his left. So past probably Mr. Martel's peripheral vision.
Was Mr. Martel a flight risk at any point in time?
Not in my opinion,
And why not?
because he was compliant.
Okay. And so what happened when he was sat down? Did someone read him his rights?
He was not read any rights. No.
Okay. So what happened then?
So he was sitting there, he was not handcuffed. He kept his hands where we could see him at all times. And he's sitting on the parking, I guess they call him like a Jersey barrier, it's just a little parking block.
Okay.
So he's sitting on that and he looks up at me. And I mean, yeah, he's
How far away were you from him?
roughly 6 to 8 feet, 5 to 8 feet maybe.
Okay. Were you afraid of him?
No.
Okay. And so what happened when he looked at you?
Officer Greer told him to stop looking at me and to look at the ground
Okay. Did he?
with an expletive.
Okay. Stop looking at. What was the explicative?
He said, "Stop fucking looking at him. Look at the fucking ground."
And what did Mr. Martel do?
He looked down at the ground. And after he was looking down at the ground for a brief moment, and then he looked back and up at Officer Greer.
And what happened next?
At this point, Officer Greer shoved the subject to the ground.
The subject was sitting down on the parking barrier?
Sir.
Okay, and then he was shoved?
He was shoved forward. And the position he ended up in after the shove was his knees were on the ground, his left shoulder and the left side of his head were contacting the concrete.
How many times did Officer Greer command Mr. Martel to stop looking at you? Was it just that once?
It was either once or twice, I don't remember. I just remember he told him to stop looking at me.
Where was Officer Roush at this point in time?
Officer Roush had went to his vehicle, so again, I don't know what he went to his vehicle for.
Could you see Officer Roush from where you were standing? Or was your back to Officer Roush?
No, so I was facing towards the parking lot, but there was a concrete enclosement where the dumpster was that kind of, I believe it obstructed the view.
Okay, so it was just yourself and Officer Greer with the subject at that point in time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so after Officer Greer shoved the suspect, what happened?
Officer Greer mounted the subject in the sense of was standing directly over the top of him. He clenched his jacket with his left hand between Mr. Martel's shoulder blades. He doubled up his right fist and he struck the subject in the right side of his head.
What did he strike him with a closed fist?
Yes.
Okay, and what happened? What did the subject do?
During the time that he was being struck, I didn't see the subject do anything or make any sounds or noises. Officer Greer struck him once in the right side of his head, charged another punch, struck him again in the side of his head. He then struck him twice in the rib cage with his right hand and on Mr. Martel's right side, just slightly above his rib cage, about in between the rib cage and the armpit. He then grabbed Adrian Martel's left arm and pulled it behind his back.
At this point in time, was the subject cuffed?
He was not.
Okay, and so what happened when Officer Greer grabbed his wrist?
He pushed the subject's arm towards the top of his back. So I don't really know how to explain it, except for he had his arm behind him and was pushing it up.
Was he using force?
He was.
And what happened?
That was the first time that I heard Mr. Martel grimace in pain. And Officer Greer stated, "Who's the man?"
And what did the subject say?
Mr. Martel did not reply, so he pushed the arm even farther up his back.
Officer Greer did?
Yes, and he said, "Who's the fucking man?"
What did the subject say?
I don't recall if he said it again or if he just said it the 2 times, and then Mr. Martel said, you are, to which Officer Greer replied, "You're fucking right, I am."
Did the subject ever look at you during this confrontation?
Not during the physical conflict, no.
Okay, and about how long did this confrontation occur?
Maybe a minute or 2.
Okay, and during this whole confrontation, Officer Roush was in his unit?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were there any other patrons from the motel or hotel outside who witnessed this incident that you recall?
Not that I recall. I know there were people there.
Okay, but I'm just asking what you recall yourself. Okay. And let's see. Tell me about when, I'm assuming Officer Roush eventually came back, correct?
After the physical conflict, Officer Greer then placed Adrian Martel in handcuffs, stood him up, and then began walking him to the police unit in the middle of the parking lot.
And so Officer Greer cuffed both of his wrists?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point in time, did Officer Roush kind of meet up with Officer Greer?
Yes, as we were walking back to the police unit.
And you were there with the 2 of them?
Yes, sir.
And did you recall any conversations at that point in time between the officers?
They stood, Adrian next to the police unit for a little while. I don't recall a conversation, and then Officer Roush said, okay, ready, going live.
And what did that mean to you?
To me, that meant they were going to turn their cameras on.
Okay. Had you ever heard Officer Roush or Officer Greer use those kind of terms throughout the day?
I don't remember.
You don't recall? Did you have any discussions with Officer Roush or Officer Greer about the use of the recording equipment?
Yeah, so after the incident took place, Officer Greer asked me, do you have a camera? And I said, no. And then I went even further and said, I'm not that guy. You don't have to worry about that.
What did you mean by that?
After what had happened, I wanted to sorry, give me just a second. I wanted to instill that I was not to be worried about turning him in for what he'd done.
Okay. According to the training that you had at that point in time, did you believe that the conduct that you witnessed was unlawful?
Yes, sir. Do you recall ever hearing the Miranda rights read to Mr. Martell? No, sir.
Do you ever recall any of the officers telling Mr. Martell that he was under arrest?
I don't remember him saying it.
Did you ever, prior to this incident, did you know Mr. Greer at all?
No, sir.
Okay, was this the first time that you met Mr. Greer as well?
Yes, sir, at the beginning of the day.
Okay, and same with Officer Roush, I believe, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any conversations with Officer Roush about what you just witnessed?
Yes.
And what were those conversations about?
So after Mr. Martell was placed in the unit, we drove to the edge of the parking lot just prior to Central. Officer Greer pulled up next to us. Officer Roush went inside to talk to hotel management about the incident, I guess, why, sorry, I'm saying I guess. He went inside to talk to hotel management for a little while.
Okay.
He came back out and he asked me, he said, what do you think we should do? To which I responded, I think we should let him go.
Okay, and what happened?
We then transported Martell to the PTC and booked him.
Okay. And do you recall Mr. Martell making any statements during that transport ride?
Yes, and it was close to or at the same time that Officer Roush asked me what he thought we should do, and Mr. Martell said, "Hey, if you let me go, I won't say anything."
That was when he was already cuffed in the back of the unit?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you notice any injuries on Mr. Martell after the confrontation?
I did not.
Okay. And did you try to observe any injuries, or?
I didn't. That wasn't really what I was paying attention to at that point.
Okay. Do you recall any other statements from Officer Greer regarding the confrontation? Any injuries were sustained to the officer?
Not a statement, but while the vehicles were parked next to each other, the windows were down, and Officer Greer was looking at Officer Roush and rubbed the knuckles on his right fist, and Officer Roush stated, it's hard to remember, I think he said, "Did you hurt it again?" And Officer Greer nodded.
What did that indicate to you?
It indicated to me that during the altercation that he had somehow injured his fist from the strikes.
Do you recall what charges were brought against the suspect?
I don't.
Do you recall if medical was needed for the suspect?
He didn't request it, and medical was not called.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the question? Could you repeat the question?
Question, do you recall if medical was needed for the suspect? Answer, he did request it and medical was not. He
No,
didn't
he did
request it.
not request
I'm
it.
sorry, he did not request it and medical was not called.
Not responsive. The answer is non-responsive to your question.
Okay. Did you participate in preparing the report with Officer Roush? Did he help like show you what's going on, how to prepare the report and things of that nature?
No, sir.
Did he discuss about tagging evidence for the case with you?
No, sir.
Okay. Did he discuss the importance of capturing the incident on video with you?
No, sir.
And so, after Mr. Martel was brought to the is it MDC, was it?
PTC.
PTC?
Downtown.
Okay. What happened next after that?
So he was booked and turned over to the officers at PTC. He went to his cell. And, you know, I was nervous about the incident that occurred. So I was probably watching Mr. Martel more than I should have, but he got into the holding cell there at the PTC and was talking to another prisoner and was pointing at us. And I asked Officer Roush, I said, hey, did you see he's pointing at us? And he goes, yeah, whatever. And then we walked out.
Okay. When Mr. Martel was sitting on the curb, was he commanded to sit at the curb, do you recall?
Yes.
And did he ever disobey that command?
No.
Did he ever try to get up?
No.
Where were his hands during the time he was sitting on the curb?
They were in front of him, similar to the way my hands are right now.
Okay. Did Mr. Martel ever try to engage in the confrontation with Officer Greer? Did he fight back?
No, sir.
Mr. Martel never threw any punches?
No, sir.
Did he resist in any way at all?
No, sir.
And this incident occurred on March 20th, 2015, which was a Friday. Is that what you recall?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do next?
After that,
I guess I withdraw that question. Was this the last call that you responded to that day, or did you have other calls?
yes, sir, it was the last call that I responded with the officers to.
With the officers? So you guys parted after this incident?
Yes, sir.
After this call? And at some point in time, you reported what you saw to your supervisor, I guess.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me how that came about?
So after the incident, I had a lot of soul searching to do, and I did so. I was going to report the incident on Monday to the academy training staff. However, Sunday night, I had to take my son to the emergency room for respiratory issues. So I didn't actually make it to academy training on Monday until around 12 or 1300. And by that time, the academy staff was no longer present. So I reported it on Tuesday.
And who did you report it to?
Officer Joe Manarino and Officer Donna Richter.
Okay. And what did you tell them? Did you relay the story?
Yes, sir.
And were you... I'm assuming that the incident was fairly fresh in your mind, so that it was an accurate representation of what you witnessed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you talk to any other cadets when you were trying to figure out whether or not you should go forward with this?
Yes, sir. On Monday, I talked to now Officer Josh Trujillo.
Okay, and what kind of conversation did you have with Officer Trujillo?
So I pulled him aside while we were on a break. I just said, hey dude, I need to talk to you for a second. And I asked him, I said, hey, do you know Officer Greer? And he told me, yeah, I know him, or I know of him. I said, and I basically just told him, like, you know, a very brief synopsis of what had happened. And I asked him, I said, what do you think I should do? And he told me, you know, either road you choose is a rough road. You know, he said, but if I were you, I would come forward.
Going back to once, I believe, Mr. Martel was placed under arrest and Officer Roush said that he was going live, the cameras were turned on. Did you notice any change in the behavior of the officers at that point in time?
Yes, sir.
Can you please tell me how they changed?
Once the cameras were on, it went from less aggressive to more just being friendly. As in, I believe Officer Roush told Mr. Martel, hey man, we were cool with you, so you be cool with us. Why are you trespassing? Why did you have weed on you? Things of that nature.
Okay. Did you feel like the officers were acting for the cameras at that point in time?
I do.
So at any point in time, were you afraid that the subject was going to strike you or flee?
No.
Did the subject seem coherent?
He was coherent, but very sluggish in his responses. So it was, to me, at that point in my training experience, it was obvious that he was under the influence of something.
Were any type of field sobriety tests given to the subject?
No.
He didn't blow into a portable breathalyzer?
No, sir.
Nothing of that nature? Okay. I think at this point in time, I can pass the witness.
Mr. Giamatti?
Thank you. Mr. Henry, tell us about your Air Force experience. How long were you in, first of all?
9 years.
And when you left the Air Force, what was your rank?
I was a staff sergeant.
Did you have any boxing experience?
No.
Never had any boxing experience?
Boxing in the academy.
When you made a statement in describing the punches, to Sergeant Simbala, see if I can find that. You just tell us how you described the punches during your internal affairs interview.
I believe I described them as haymakers.
Haymakers. And let me just find this real quick. How many interviews did you give with internal affairs?
Just the one, as I recall.
You gave one on March 25th. Is that right?
I believe so.
And then one on March 27th. Do you remember getting called back in?
March 27th would have been the interview with state police.
Now show the witness in Exhibit 50, and in conjunction with Exhibit 46. So just to refresh your memory, let me show you the first line of Exhibit 46. Do you remember that interview on March 25th?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'm going to show you Exhibit 50. Does that refresh your memory as to the second interview?
To be honest, I just remember the one interview.
So you don't remember the interview on March 27th, which is summarized or transcribed as Exhibit 50?
I don't.
Okay. So you don't remember telling Sergeant Cimbala that with your boxing experience, it was 2 haymakers, correct?
Yes.
It was from way, and I'm quoting you, they were way from way behind the shoulder and pulled back way behind the shoulder again and another one. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, based on your perception, Officer Greer punched this individual while he was on his knees?
His knees were on the ground, and his shoulder and his head were on the ground.
So Greer, based on your description, punched this individual with his full force?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Officer Trujillo described the statement that you gave him is that after those punches, Martell's head bounced off the concrete 2 or 3 times. Do you remember seeing that happen?
Yes, sir.
So it was after each punch that the head bounced off the concrete?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was that to the left or to the right side of Martell's face?
As far as where the strikes were delivered or where his head was placed on the concrete?
Thank you for that clarification. Where he struck his head on the concrete.
It would be on the left side.
Left side? Okay. Now, my understanding is that you had some significant training while you were at the Air Force, correct? Things like survival school
Yes, sir.
and self-defense techniques, correct?
They're very limited in the Air Force, but there were some.
Why didn't you ever try to stop Greer?
I still struggle with that to this very day.
I mean, what steps in retrospect could you have done to stop what you described?
Oh, I guess I could have tried to fight a uniformed officer.
Well, short of a fight, could you have just grabbed his arm after the first blow? Could you have called Officer Roush?
I could have.
You were equipped with a radio in addition to what you described earlier on direct exam, correct?
Yes, sir.
Could you call the supervisor? Could you have gotten on the radio and
I
called?
could not have. My radio at that point in time was only keyed to Academy radio, so I could hear all transmissions, but I could not transmit.
So were you hearing any transmissions at this point?
Not that I recall.
Did you have the cell phone numbers of your cadet instructors?
I did.
Did you call them?
No, sir.
Did you call them when you, well, this call occurred sometime around 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you indicated on direct examination that this was your last call with these 2 folks, Greer and Roush?
Yes, sir.
Where did you go after you cleared from Officer Roush? You were assigned to him that day, correct?
Yes, sir.
Where did you go?
Home.
Did you call anybody from your cell phone
No, sir.
concerning this incident?
No, sir.
What about Saturday? Did you make any cell phone contacts with your academy instructors on Saturday?
No, sir.
Your son was not sick Saturday, was he?
No, sir.
What about Sunday morning when you woke up? Did you call your instructors at that point?
No, sir.
Sunday night? Your son was sick, you were en route to the hospital?
I had texted an instructor at I believe, 4 o'clock in the morning to let them know that I wasn't going to be able to make it in on time.
So you had the ability and the means and the method to text an instructor to say you would be late for Monday's classes, and you said nothing about the incident you observed Friday night.
Yes, sir.
And then you go to court Monday morning, correct?
Yes, sir.
You don't tell anybody about this except Officer Trujillo.
Yes, sir.
And then all day Monday, you don't text or make any contact with anybody, correct?
Yes, sir.
Then finally Tuesday, and you had gone to the academy that day, right, Monday?
No, sir. I went directly to the courthouse.
And after you cleared the courthouse, where'd you go?
Home.
What time was court?
It was scheduled for all day.
What time did you clear court?
I believe 15 or 1600.
So you were there from 10 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
No, sir. As I advised earlier, I believe I arrived at the courthouse around 12 to 1300.
Bear with me just 1 second.
Certainly.
Was it just you and Trujillo or your entire class at court on Monday?
The entire class.
And were any instructors with you during the class? Any supervisors?
No, sir.
It was just you folks in the class?
Yes, sir. And district attorneys were the ones hosting the class.
Now, by this time on Monday, you had completed your training at the Academy in Defensive Tactics,
Yes, sir.
and you had completed your training on use of force.
Yes, sir.
And part of that training was as close as we can get to a bright line between that which is reasonable force and that which is excessive force,
Yes, sir.
correct? And you described in your direct examination that what you believed you saw Friday evening at the hands of Officer Greer was excessive force,
Yes, sir.
almost criminal,
Not almost.
definitely criminal.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me go back and make sure that I have this right. As a cadet with prior experience in the Air Force, you see a criminal act occur, you don't tell Officer Roush or call his aide, you don't call your supervisor, you don't call anybody at the cadet, and you don't call anybody in the Southeast Area Command to report a crime. Friday goes by, Saturday goes by, Sunday goes by, Monday, Metro Court's pretty busy on Mondays, correct?
Yes, sir.
A lot of police officers, sworn and certified police officers were there.
Yes, sir.
You didn't mention any of the crimes that you saw to them.
No, sir.
And you're in a mock trial in Metro Court with district attorneys or assistant district attorneys present. You don't pull any of those folks aside
No, sir.
and tell them what you saw, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just make sure, sure. On Tuesday, you graduated first in your class.
Yes, sir.
Did you get the gun?
I got a gift card, yes, sir.
You got a what?
A gift card.
They're not giving out firearms anymore?
No.
The new age we're living in. All right, so let's go back to your testimony on direct with regard to statements. The only time you saw Martell evidence any pain was when he had his arm pushed up, correct?
Yes, sir.
He didn't say anything or grunt anything or make any verbal sound when he was punched full bore, haymaker style, 2 times on the side of the head.
No, sir.
I'm sorry?
No, sir.
You said there were civilians in the area who may or may not have observed
Yes, sir.
this? So not only did you not report what you saw, you did not seek to obtain witness statements of what they may have seen.
No, sir.
Do you know the identity of those individuals?
I do not.
Were you disciplined for any of this?
No, sir.
If you were, I'm concerned as Mr. Greer's attorney, but more importantly as a citizen of Albuquerque, are you going to take those same actions if you see another officer exhibit what you saw Mr. Greer did? Keep your mouth shut?
No, sir.
Now, you indicated that you, after you said Greer placed the suspect in handcuffs?
Yes.
What color were the handcuffs?
Chrome,
They were chrome?
silver,
I mean, are you just saying that standard?
standard issue.
As you close your eyes today, you actually see chrome handcuffs going on the suspect?
No, I don't. No, that was,
Well, I want your best memory.
I don't remember paying particular attention to the color of the handcuffs.
Okay, let's stay on the handcuffs just for a second. You testified that Greer placed one handcuff on Martell's wrist, correct?
Sir?
When you say one handcuff, one side of a pair, correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember which hand that was?
His left.
His left hand. And did Greer ultimately place the second side of that pair on the right hand?
Yes.
Roush never handcuffed the suspect?
We adjusted his handcuffs.
Roush never handcuffed the suspect?
I don't remember. I mean, I don't.
Well, either Greer's handcuffed the suspect or Roush handcuffed the suspect.
Hearing officer, he has already asked.
He said he didn't remember.
And that's the answer to the question.
Well, which contradicts his earlier answer that Greer handcuffed the suspect. May I proceed just briefly?
I'll give you a little bit
Little
of
bit,
that
little
too.
bit. Okay, so as you sit here today, do you remember who handcuffed the suspect? Now,
No.
after Martell was handcuffed, you indicated on direct examination that Roush tells Greer something to the effect of going live.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that right?
Yes, sir.
And you saw them activate their lapel cameras.
At that time, I didn't know exactly what they were doing because I wasn't trained with the TASER lapel camera system. But now I do know that, yes, they were activating their lapel cameras.
And they were both standing outside of the unit.
Yes, sir.
Then they placed Martell into the rear of Roush's unit.
Yes, sir.
And that's when Roush heard you say something to the effect, "I'm not that guy."
No.
When did he say that to you?
When? Who? I'm
When
sorry.
did Roush, when did you tell Roush, quote, "I'm not that
I
guy"?
did not say that to
Who said
Officer
that?
Rich. I said that to Officer Greer.
Was that after they activated their lapel cameras?
It would have been after they had activated their lapel cameras and turned them back off when we were sitting in the units.
Okay, so that conversation will be on the lapel camera.
No, sir. I just stated it would have been after they turned their lapel cameras off, but after the incident was over.
Okay, so let me make sure that I understand this. You all arrive on scene, you make contact with Martell, you get Martell into custody, and after that point, after Martell's in custody, you believe that they being Roush and Greer, activated the lapel camera.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then, did I understand you to say they turned it off again?
Once Mr. Martell was placed into the police unit,
So they turned the lapel cameras off?
as far as I know, yes.
Did you see them turn the lapel cameras off?
I did not.
So what made you think they turned it off?
It's kind of standard practice that when you're no longer dealing with an individual, you turn your camera off.
Where did you learn this standard practice?
There really is no way to learn it other than working in the field.
So when you say it's a standard practice, it wasn't standard that was established by Greer to you, correct? It wasn't established by Officer Roush to you at that point, correct?
No.
And frankly, it wasn't established by any other officer that you had worked with as a standard, quote, standard practice?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So as far as you knew, they were still activated, they being the cameras, when this statement was made?
Possibly, yes.
Along with every other statement, if Roush transported the prisoner to the prisoner transport center, you now know it's policy to keep that lapel camera active while you're transporting the prisoner, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there's no reason for you to believe that Roush did not comply with that SOP when he transported Martell, correct?
Objection, that calls for speculation.
If he knows, is there any reason, for example, did you see Roush, I'm sorry, I was going to withdraw the question, but
You want to withdraw it?
I'll withdraw it and do it in a different way. Did you see anything as a passenger in Roush's vehicle while you were transporting Martell to the prisoner transport center that would lead you to believe that Roush turned his lapel camera off?
Not that I remember.
Okay. So all the conversations that you said occurred by Martell, hey man, if you let me go, I won't tell on you, would be on the lapel camera
Should be, yes.
during the transport.
Yes.
And if they're not,
Objection, that calls for speculation.
if they're not, they didn't occur, correct?
No, not correct.
I'm going to restate that question, please. Let's move on.
Okay. So you get to the prisoner transport center, and you're standing by Martell, right?
Yes.
And since this incident, this is several months ago, congratulations, by the way, being a P2C, have you had the opportunity to book prisoners at the prisoner transport center
Yes.
with another officer, correct?
No.
Are you on your own yet?
Yes, sir.
When did you go on your own?
In August.
Okay. And you've had prisoners that you transported to the prisoner transport center on your own?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Describe to the hearing officer and for us in the record, what happens when you get to the prisoner transport center with a prisoner?
So when you get to the prisoner transport center, you walk in with your prisoner, you have them have a seat, you walk up to the counter, you hand them your paperwork, they look through your paperwork, make sure it's squared away, and then they call the prisoner up. He is then transferred into their custody, and they take him to a holding cell.
Now, before they take him into their custody, they clear him for medical, correct?
I do not know.
Have you ever taken a prisoner to the prisoner transport center, or have you heard of an officer taking a prisoner to the prisoner transport center who refused to accept a prisoner?
I'm sorry, I'm not following what you mean.
What's the policy, if you know, of the prisoner transport center when an officer attempts to book someone who needs medical attention?
If they request medical attention, then paramedics have to come out to the PTC.
And did they in this case?
Not to my knowledge.
Did Martell ever ask you to call for rescue for him?
No, sir.
Did Martell ever ask you to give him aid, assistance?
No, sir.
Bear with me just a second. You gave a statement to the state police in this case,
Yes, sir.
and you did not described to the state police the description you provided to the state police officer who investigated this case criminally, the punches were described as punches to the side of the head, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you use the word haymaker in that description?
I don't know.
Do you remember what you told the state police officer?
Not verbatim.
It's true that you did not use the word haymaker until your internal affairs interview, right? Nowhere is that word used in the state police investigation, your statement.
I don't have the statement in front of me, sir. I don't know.
What have you reviewed to prepare you for today's testimony?
I have reviewed my state police statement.
And the word haymaker is not. Did you say you have or have not?
I have.
Hey, you did not use the word haymaker, did you?
I may not have.
Okay. Now, you also said that during that same interview with the state police, his face was on the ground. His being Martell,
Sir.
right? And the face, and I'm reading, the subject's face had impacted the ground. Is that right? Is that what you told the state police officer?
Yes, sir.
And nowhere did you tell the state police officer in your interview with him that the head bounced off the concrete twice after the punches, correct?
No, sir.
I mean, no, sir, that's not correct?
Yes,
sir, that is
yes,
correct.
it is correct.
Yes, sir, that is correct. And it was the only until you got to internal affairs that you said Martell's head bounced off the concrete after the punches, right?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe for the hearing officer the level of force used with the punches to the ribs?
In my opinion, they were shorter, not as hard punches. I believe I described them as rabbit punches.
Did you see the Martell's body jerk after the first punch? If you've done any boxing in the academy, is that the experience you're referring to
It's
in
very,
your boxing experience?
very minimal, yes, sir.
When you're punched in the kidneys or the ribs, do you react in the academy when you were punched there?
I don't recall I've ever been punched in the kidney or ribs, sir.
Have you ever seen anyone punched in the kidney or ribs?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe the reaction, if any, that you observed when the person being punched in the kidney or ribs?
I mean, when I saw it, it was in active boxing, so I don't recall a reaction.
No. Earlier in your direct exam, you said that, I don't believe you got to finish your answer, when you're assigned as a ride-along as a cadet with an officer, your instructors tell you to either take notes throughout the shift, or was there an alternative to that?
At the end of the shift, you can have the officer print out a summary of all the calls that you took, so you know what to take notes on, or what to build an outline for.
And did you do either or both on that day, March 20th, 2015?
I attempted to. I asked Officer Roush at the end of the shift if he could print out what's the CADS, his computer-aided dispatch log, and he said, no, I'm not hooked up to a printer, I can't.
So what did you do? How did you explain the absence of a printout notes, or I take it you didn't take any field notes during the day?
No, sir.
How did you explain that to the academy? You didn't have field notes, nor did you have a printout of the day's events.
I did not explain it to the academy.
Now, at all times material, you were in the vehicle, Roush's vehicle, from the moment Martell got in the vehicle to be transported until you arrived at the prisoner transport center when you turned over custody of Martell, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, I noted in the state police report that there was blood in the rear of Roush's vehicle. Do you remember reading that? Do you remember having any knowledge of that?
No.
Okay. You didn't see any blood, did you? Coming from Martell's facial area or body at any point?
Not that I recall. No.
You didn't see any scraped knuckles bleeding on Martell or anything?
Not that I recall.
Or facial or anything?
No, sir.
And if you did see any type of abrasion or bleeding, what steps, if any, would you have taken?
At that point, I don't know if I would have.
Would you have not told anyone at PTC, the Prisoner Transport Center, this guy may need medical?
Objection, it calls for speculation.
Sustained.
You didn't ask anybody at PTC to look at this guy for medical?
No, sir.
You have no information whatsoever how he reported to MDC?
How he what?
How he reported to Metro Detention Center, MDC?
No, sir.
Okay. Is it normal for you to leave the shift early when you were assigned to ride-along? I thought you said it ended at about $2,300.
Yes, sir.
Were you expected to stay at $2,300?
Not normally. No, sir.
Not normally are you expected to stay for the entire shift, or not normally is it that you leave early? What's not normal?
It depends on the officer that you're assigned to. Sometimes the officer will cut you loose a little early, just so they can take care of any kind of paperwork that they need to take care of, or if they're just kind of tired of having somebody following them around, they'll release you early.
And what
Walking
was it?
around what, I'm sorry?
What's that?
Pretty sure.
Pretty.
Yeah, if they're just tired of somebody following them around,
Pretty.
they'll release you early.
What happened on the 20th?
I got released once we got back to the southeast substation after booking
Who released you?
Officer Roush.
And did he tell you why? Did you report that to anybody?
No, sir.
Did you find that odd?
No, sir.
Was Roush the primary or backup officer on this call with Martell?
I believe he was primary.
And could you tell the hearing officer what the duties of a backup officer are?
Based on my training, the duties of a backup officer is to keep the scene secure and protect the primary officer.
Who was protecting the primary officer when Roush was in his unit?
Officer Greer.
Greer was with the suspect and you, correct?
Right.
Okay, all right. Did you go hands-on with Martell?
No, sir.
Never assisted at all with the handcuffing or adjustment of the handcuffs?
I assisted with the flashlight.
You held
Such a
flashlight?
what?
A flashlight.
Sorry. May I have a moment, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
If it would benefit you, might be a good time for a 5-minute bathroom break.
That'd be great.
We'll call off the record for a quick break.
Thank you.